Going to be a longer form video about the Battle of Guadalcanal. So a lot of people know Guadalcanal. It's written on our patch, but probably don't have a real understanding of the battle or what went on. So I want to make a video kind of explain the battle. So kind of giving some context here. It's going to be a longer form video, but so the overall situation with Japan. So obviously December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu here. So the U.S. Pacific Fleet loses 4 battleships. Obviously, that's pretty massive. The one saving grace is the carriers are out to sea. So the U.S. carriers are not damaged, which is really what we're going to see is the main driver of power projection in the Pacific. So Japan really pulls off a very impressive series of near simultaneous attacks across all allied nations in the Pacific. So Pearl Harbor is obviously the opening blow, but within hours they attack several other allied possessions in the Pacific. So Guam, right here, that falls on December 8th. Wake, a small detachment of Marines, repels an attack on December 11th, but they would be attacked once again on December 23rd and overwhelmed. The Philippines down here, and of course this is not to scale, not exact, but just a rough drawing. The Philippines down here, they're going to be attacked on December 7th. MacArthur actually has a advantage in numbers, but strategically he has a lot of local Filipino fighters. He's isolated navally, and he eventually falls back to the peninsula of Bataan, and the Marines on the stronghold of Corregidor finally surrender on April 9th, and that's famously the 4th Marine Regiment, which was previously in China, gets pulled back to the Philippines, and then they're surrendered there, and they have to burn the colors. Just kind of interestingly, I believe the 4th Marine Regiment, which was reformed under the during the war, was one of the first units to land in mainland Japan after their surrender. So pretty interesting note there. So some naval defeats as well. So on December 10th, the British battleship, the Prince of Wales, as well as the battle cruiser HMS Repulse, are sunk by Japanese aircraft. And basically, at this time, there's not nearly enough Allied aircraft in the theater to fend off these Japanese strikes, and these Allied fleets are moving without air cover, and they're really essentially sitting ducks and totally unprepared. Hong Kong, which is of course in China, which is a little off the map, and it's supposed to be this bastion, this fortress. Same with Singapore. That surrenders on December 25th, and that's the fall of Hong Kong and the fall of Singapore are these huge demoralizing events for the British, and they have these huge garrisons and stockpiles, and they're really overwhelmed by numerically inferior Japanese forces, which gives this aura that maybe Western nations are not capable of competing with the Japanese Empire, which will kind of carry itself into Guadalcanal, and that's where that myth kind of gets reversed. So Rabaul, which is the northern chain of the Solomons here, where we're going to talk about Guadalcanal. So in the very north, Rabaul, which is like this huge fortress, it has a deep anchorage for shipping. That's captured January 1942, and that's really the key to a lot of operations in the southwestern Pacific here. On February 15th, 80,000 Commonwealth soldiers surrender at Singapore. And Singapore, of course, is a little further southwest of the Philippines. On February 27th, combined Allied fleet tries to intercept a Japanese invasion fleet heading to Java. A light cruiser Java and a heavy cruiser De Ruyter from Allied nations are sunk and really do very minimal damage to the Japanese there. On the 28th, following that, an American cruiser, the USS Houston, and a Allied cruiser, the light cruiser HMAS Perth, are sunk in an action trying to escape to the Indian Ocean. And I just threw that in there. It's a great book called Ship of Ghosts, describes the action of the USS Houston, which was like FDR's favorite ship to be on in the 30s. And it was a pretty heavy blow. And those sailors would spend 4 years in captivity building railroads in Thailand, which is a pretty interesting story. On March 1st, British cruiser Exeter is sunk, and then the Java and the Dutch East Indies are captured on 12 March, which is kind of southwest here. And those are huge resource stockpiles. Of course, the Netherlands captured by Germany. This is kind of where their government in exile is, and that's captured. So it's like an entire allied nation wiped out, of course, combined with the strongholds of Singapore and Hong Kong being captured, advances in the Pacific, in the Philippines. It's like this huge wave, this huge Japanese wave overcoming the entire southwestern Pacific. And for a small island nation of Japan, who's very resource dependent, to take out, like, obviously the Royal Navy and the British Navy is this huge, powerful entity, is extremely shocking. I can't really overstate that. So one of the first counterattacks comes is a U.S. fleet in the Coral Sea. So they're trying to counteract landings at Port Moresby on the southern tip of New Guinea here. So on May 8th, we sink the Japanese carrier Shohu, but we lose the USS Lexington. So it's kind of a one-for-one carrier swap here. And at this point, U.S. carriers are numerically inferior. However, of course, our building capacity is higher. So in the short term, these losses are very impactful for the U.S., but it's more impactful for Japan in the long term. We also damage the carrier Shokaku, but our own carrier Yorktown is damaged as well. From 4 to 7 June, we jump from May to June here. We fight the Battle of Midway, which is all the way over here. And basically, Midway would allow them to keep reconnaissance flights over Pearl Harbor and know whenever we were launching our Pacific Fleet. So incredibly close to mainland Hawaii. We have a garrison there, and we wind up sinking 4 Japanese carriers, the Kaga, Akagi, the Hiryu, and the Soryu, and we lose the Yorktown. So that leaves us 3 carriers in the Pacific, and even though we sink 4, we're still outnumbered. Our carriers are still outnumbered in the Pacific. But of course, like I said, strategically, the loss of 4 carriers, Japan will never recover in the long term. However, in the short term, they still own a numerical superiority of carriers. So after Midway, the distribution of forces in the Pacific, as far as carriers, Japan has the Shokaku and Zuikaku. Those are fleet carriers, and they have the light carrier Ryujo, Zuiho, Junyo, and Hiyu. And we only have 3. We have the Hornet, the Enterprise, and the Wasp. So yeah, sinking 4 carriers is great. However, we're still vastly outnumbered. So why Guadalcanal? Of course, it's like this small nation, or not nation, small island northwest of Australia. Well, the Japanese land troops on Tulagi, which is a small island adjacent to Guadalcanal, and we see that they're building an airfield on Guadalcanal. And what that would allow them to do is basically cut our sea line of communication to Australia. And what that means is not exactly communication, but supplies, resources, things that Australia needs to defend itself. We would not be able to get there because they'd be able to launch planes and intercept those supplies. And you think Australia at this time, basically the entire Australian military is fighting Rommel in North Africa. So Australia really has no capability to defend itself. The troops we had in the Pacific were largely committed to the Philippines before the war. We could not evacuate them. So we have very marginal troops throughout the Pacific, especially in Australia. So it's very um, it's a very dangerous position that we're in. The Japanese are pushing south uh, from New Guinea south towards Port Moresby down here, and that would really signal the demise of Australia. If they can access Port Moresby and have a deep water port just off the Australian coast, so there's a vicious fighting along the Kokoda Trail there, and we'll see a lot of forces, a lot of Japanese forces intended for New Guinea are diverted. About 40,000 troops are diverted to Guadalcanal. So not only do we fight Guadalcanal and win that, but we also pull troops out of the New Guinea campaign, which allows the Army and New Zealand and Australian troops to push the Japanese back up the Kokoda Trail. So that's strategically valuable, a point in the Guadalcanal campaign as well. So just real quick about the division's preparation. So really the 1st and 5th Marines, the 7th Marines are in Samoa defending American assets down there. And that's southeast of Guadalcanal. So the 1st and 5th regiments have 5 weeks in New Zealand to prepare for the invasion. And there's some huge challenges. Really, at this time, we didn't have rations that were designed for field use. There were like strikes on the ports, so like Marines are loading and combat loading ships themselves. Like there's stores of like that, like cardboard boxes of cornflakes that are in the rain just getting destroyed, and like that's the supplies, that's the food we had were like cornflakes and cardboard boxes. So really a huge lesson, and the Marine Corps had done a ton of interwar learning beforehand, but this became a huge lesson in like combat loading, supplies, and like how to prepare basically for an invasion. They do like one preparatory like mock landing on the way in, and it's like a disaster, and all the landing craft get caught on coral reefs. So hopes are like kind of not high. Like the division's short. We like grossly estimated how many enemy troops are on Guadalcanal, so we're not really sure what this is going to look like. So I'm just going to draw Guadalcanal here. I don't have like fancy like the capability or knowledge to really do fancy like graphics and stuff. So I'm just going to draw it on a whiteboard here. And obviously it's not going to be a scale. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be enough for me to talk off of, and hopefully you guys kind of understand based off that. So we really go into the fight on Guadalcanal with like no good understanding of the terrain. So there's some like former colonial, if I remember correctly, like pineapple farmers, and they like, yeah, they're, they call this thing the grassy knoll. So like the first day objective is like, oh, we'll take the grassy knoll. It turns out to be this huge mountain that like the division never reaches. We were supposed to get maps. They overflew the area with B-17s, and we were supposed to get maps. And I guess you could never really prove it, but basically those sat in Australia. So MacArthur was evacuated from the Philippines and set up his staff there, and like these maps sat on his intelligence officer's desk because they didn't want to really help the Marines. And of course you can't prove that, but it was just one of those things where it was like kind of suspect, and like they were found after by a member of Joe Vandiger's staff. They're like, where are these maps? Like there's a pile of Guadalcanal maps after they got off Guadalcanal that they could have used. So figure really like company commanders only had maps, and they're more or less hand drawn. So just a really from the hip way to fight a war. But the Marines improv. A lot of the company command, or a lot of the regimental and battalion commanders were veterans of like the jungle fights. Clifton Cates, who was this Medal of Honor recipient from World War One, of course, was a regimental commander. So there's a ton of experience, a ton of interwar combat experience, whether they were small wars or World War One. And you had some pretty fantastic leaders in good places. Of course, General Vandergrift would receive the Medal of Honor for his handling of the division. Okay, this is going to be good enough for us to fight off of. And this surprise good of a map as they were working with in 1942. So let me just put Tassafaranga on there. Okay. So division lands August 7th, 1942. Of course, the Marines really don't know what they're walking into. So they land on the beaches just north of Henderson Field. 1-5 and 3-5 land first. They're the two first battalions that land, followed by the 1st Marine Regiment. So 2-5 is going to be split off to assist Tulagi. So the 1st Raider Battalion and 2-5 land on a separate island of Tulagi. The 1st Parachute Battalion, which would never make a jump just due to terrain in the Pacific, but they land at Gavudu and have a really tough fight there. And then 1-2, 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, lands on Florida Island. And all those are secured within a day. So by August 8th, all those smaller islands are secured. So we land on August 7th. On August 8th, unloading is delayed following an air raid. And this is going to be critical because really they're only authorized 2 or 3 days to unload before Admiral Gormley gets really nervous and wants to pull his carriers out because he only has very few carriers and doesn't want to risk them getting basically jumped by the Japanese. And he'd eventually be relieved for kind of shying away from the fight, but that'll come later. So hopefully you still kind of see that, and I'll leave that up there and read off my notes here. So Fletcher is in charge of the carriers. Gormley is in command above Fletcher. So Fletcher says, hey, my carriers are low on fuel. I got to pull out of here. Historians will say that's kind of a BS excuse, but regardless, he pulls the carriers out. Admiral Kelly Turner, who's in charge of the transport fleet, obviously loses his air cover, and he decides he has to pull out. And of course, the Battle of Savo Island that night will force his hand. So Battle of Savo Island, on the night of August 8th, Japan sends 5 heavy cruisers and 2 light cruisers down into Sea Lark Channel, which will be called Iron Bottom Sound. And basically what happens is there's these, the U.S. surface fleet is anchored out there to protect the unloading. And they basically get jumped. They're extremely complacent. They have this commanders meeting, but don't really put anyone in charge. There's a lot of communication issues. There's multiple nations. There's an Australian vessel. So basically, and the Japanese are fantastic night fighters. The U.S. did not practice night fighting in training. They said it was too dangerous, so they never did it in peacetime, whereas the Japanese did and excelled at it. So they sink the U.S. or the HMS Canberra, the USS Quincy, and the USS Vincennes, and the USS Astoria, and they shear off the USS Chicago's bow. So 4 heavy cruisers, essentially 5 lost in one night. So you think how thin we are on surface vessels. We lose 4 battleships at Pearl Harbor. We're outnumbered on carriers, so this is kind of a surface war at this point. And off the rip, we lose 4 heavy cruisers. So this is huge. So, and that also signals, so the next day, August 9th, begins the daily aerial bombardment of Guadalcanal, likely Henderson Field, due to the Japanese launching air raids from Rabaul down the slot. So Rabaul is northwest. This is the northern coast of Guadalcanal. Northwest is Rabaul. That's where the Japanese fleet is. Their headquarters. They have a ton of troops. They have ton of aircraft, and they send nightly bombing raids down. So if you watch Pacific and Robert, like, he goes, yeah, they murdered sleep. That's part of what he's talking about. We'll get into like shelling and stuff later on, but that's the start of it. So the Marines start thinking about the Marines on Bataan. We lost a regiment at Bataan. Now we have two regiments, two infantry regiments, an artillery regiment here. And we're like, well, same thing. We're cut off by sea. We have limited supplies. We don't have air superiority. We're in trouble. So rations get cut by a third because so many supplies were not unloaded. The 2nd Marine Regiment was embarked. Instead of landing them, they get withdrawn with the rest of the shipping. So rations get cut to a third. There's only 4 days worth of ammo on the beach at this time. And most of the rations the Marines are getting are captured Japanese rice. So like the first day we land, by the second day we capture Henderson Field, we overrun. It's basically just construction and aircraft maintenance there. So we overrun those guys. And capture their supplies of rice and everything. And that's what the Marines are living on. So I'm going to read basically a firsthand account. This is a great book. George McMillan wrote this. It's like the official history. It was written in 1946. So let me go to page 48. So they have this meeting on August 9th at the Division CP. So it was raining and the group stood or sat close to share the dubious warmth of a smoky fire. Someone had made coffee and it was passed around in empty and not too clean sea ration cans. Just as the means of hospitality were short, so too was the news. Short and bitter as a GI coffee. Everyone heard the news and pretended to disbelieve it. We had lost our cruisers that night. Even now there was a heavy sound of naval gunfire echoing through the thick mist of the morning. The palm fronds trembled lightly with the concussion of each successive salvo and sent down showers of tiny drops which went unnoticed in the general downpour. Nobody knew what the firing was about. The mist lifted momentarily and offshore we could make out a single cruiser, making slowly towards the east. Even from this distance it was plain that the cruiser had parted company with her bow and was picking her way painfully towards Sealark Channel, attended solicitously by a few destroyers. Chicago, somebody said. So 1-1 was held in Division Reserve. The 1st Marines defended the beaches from Lunga to Tenaru. And the 5th Marines on the left defended the Lunga to the high ground, 1,000 yards south of Cucumba. So the 1st Engineers finished the airfield, which was completed on August 12th. 3rd Defense Battalion had 5-inch guns and 90mm aircraft sent up. And basically the 11th Marines were set up so they could shoot 360 degrees. So at this point, the defense was oriented towards the beach. So they realized the Navy's gone. We have to, and we're more likely to receive a counter landing on our own landing beaches than we would be to face an overland attack. So Cucumba, where the 5th Marines was oriented, so they're from oriented basically this way here. So at this time, the Marines are still oriented, trying to locate the Japanese defenders. We're more concerned about a landing from the sea. And basically this jungle is just being aggressively patrolled. There's ridges here, but we're oriented in a defensive position facing basically a U shape along the Lunga over to the Tenaru and out. So a pretty tough learning lesson here is the Goki Patrol, or the Goddard Patrol. I don't know exactly how to pronounce Colonel Goki's name, but so he was the Division G2, so he's the intelligence officer. So Marines capture this Japanese construction worker, and he said there was a camp of sick Japanese. So that aligns. So they get that information. They have a patrol that goes out that says, "Oh yeah, we saw a bunch of white flags out on the beach." So they believe that this is a surrender. Really, what these white flags are Japanese victory flags that they would put on their bayonets. It was just a Japanese flag, but until they're blowing in the breeze, it looked like a white flag until the wind was blowing and you could see the red circle in the middle. So Colonel Goki, he takes the division surgeon. So he hears this, and instead of really taking a combat patrol, he thinks he's going to accomplish like this humanitarian mission. So he takes the division surgeon, the 5th Marine surgeon, which some people were like, he was basically one of the best doctors in the Marine Corps or in the Navy. They have 2 linguists in the division. He takes one of them. He takes most, or about half of the division intelligence section and about half of the 5th Marines intelligence section. So he takes about 26 total personnel. Not a lot of infantrymen, no machine guns, and no radios. So they set off on Higgins boats, and they land west of the Matanikau towards the Matanikau village. They land on this beach. They kind of probe around, and basically they're ambushed by the Japanese. So there's only 3 survivors, and all of them swam back through sharp coral, basically stripped naked, and swam back to Henderson Field to Division CP, and they reported back basically that there was not a surrender. It was a Japanese ambush, and basically to a man, the patrol was killed. They went out. They had no radios, no grenades, and no machine guns. No BA, not even a BAR. So the last survivor left said he looked back and he saw the swords flashing in the dawn sunlight of Japanese sabers, basically mutilating Marines. So on August 18th, we decided to send out a patrol in force. So from the 5th Marines, you have Baker, Item, and Love Company, and they swept towards the Matanikau. Baker Company held along the river here, and Love Company of 3-5 swings across the river and backs down from right to left. Item Company makes a landing near Kokumbona, which is right here, and they kill about 40 Japanese troops there. The next day, on August 19th, the 1st Marine Regiment Patrol crosses the Tenaru, which is down here, and kills a 31-man Japanese Army patrol. So they look at these Japanese, their uniforms, their displacement, and they kind of realize that these Japanese troops are fresh and likely combat reinforcements for the island. These Japanese troops were from the Achiki detachment. So these were like Japanese shock troops, and they're originally meant as the Midway landing force until, of course, the Battle of Midway occurs. We sink those carriers, and the Japanese decide that they can't land on Midway. But these were the troops destined to land on Midway. The next day, August 20th, like this huge morale boost, the 1st Marine planes land at Henderson Field. So that's Fighter Squadron 223, Bomber Squadron 232, and some transports unload Naval Construction Battalion 1, which are basically the ground troops for these Marine planes. So the defense is set up along the rivers, and LPOPs are basically pushed out across the rivers. And that's the Lunga and the Tenaru. So the enemy that we're going to face on Guadalcanal, the initial stages were just these construction troops. We meet a patrol from the Achiki detachment, but basically we're going to face the 17th Army from Lieutenant General Hayatuke. So he fought in Java, and he has 2 full divisions with some other like independent brigades and detachments. So he has the 2nd Sendai Division. They served in Manchuria. They fought in Java, and these are one of the divisions that was going to New Guinea and was diverted to Guadalcanal. You have the 38th Sendai Division, and they famously captured Hong Kong. You have the Kawaguchi Brigade, which fought in the jungles of Borneo. And then you have the Achiki Detachment, which, like I said, was originally slated to take Midway. So tons of experienced troops, experienced fighters, experienced leaders. Their main problem is they're all disparate. So you have some troops still in Hong Kong, some still in Java, some still in Manchuria. So they all get committed basically piecemeal. And we'll also see that just how it's extremely difficult for the U.S. to resupply Guadalcanal, it's very difficult for the Japanese to resupply Guadalcanal as well. So August 20th, less than 2 weeks after we land, a local scout, Sergeant Major Vuza, so he's a local who decides to fight for the Marines, walks through the line, and he reports that there's Japanese moving to the Tenaru towards 2-1. So he was a local scout. He was captured, tortured, bayoneted multiple times in his torso, in his mouth. They stabbed him with officer sabers. He escapes and makes it all the way back to the line. He makes it back to 2-1 and reports hundreds of Japanese moving towards their position. So they evacuate him back to Henderson Field for medical care, and they prepare for the Battle of Tenaru. So that night, so essentially August 21st, at 0118, 900 men of the Achiki detachment attack 2-1. So Colonel Achiki, he has his initial landing of 900 Japanese troops. He does not wait for the rest of his detachment, so he has another 1,200 troops. He does not wait for them. He thinks he can capture Henderson Field with his 900 troops, so he commits them, attacking straight across the Tenaru River into 2-1. It's a vicious fight. The regimental commander, Colonel Cates, who's a World War I veteran, called artillery on the Sandspit, which is right at the mouth of the river, just 200 yards from friendly troops. I'm going to read a passage here from Robert Leckie's book, Strong Men Armed. Of course, his book, Helmet for My Pillow, is a fantastic reference. Strong Men Armed, in addition to just being a badass book, badass cover, awesome name, is basically his history of the Pacific War. So for that, it's a great reference. Not only was he there personally, but he writes pretty fantastically as a historian as well. So let me get to page 45 here. I'll read you. They came flowing across the sandspit, sprinting, hurling grenades, howling. They came blundering into that single strand of barbed wire, and there they milled about in a jabbering frenzy. They hacked wildly at the wire with bayonets. They tried to hurdle it, and they slung long, thin lengths of explosive-packed pipe under it in hopes of blowing gaps in it. Then the Marines opened fire. The flare light faded, and the re-enveloping night seemed to reel with 1,000 scarlet flashes. Machine guns shattered and shook. Rifles cracked. Grenades whizzed and boomed. Fat red tracers sped out in curving arcs and vanished. Orange puffs spat from the mouth of the anti-tank gun. Howitzers bayed in the rear distance, and their whistling shells crashed and flashed among the coconuts, where mortar missiles had already described their humming loops and were falling with that dull crunch that tears and kills. Like he has a way with words, far better than anything I could describe for sure. So, at 0830 the next morning, 1-1 crosses the Tenaru to sweep the opposing bank. So they cross and basically sweep south to north through the Japanese. There's 700 enemy KIA. Achiki kills himself and burns his colors. And so we kill 700 Japanese with a loss of 34 Marine killed in action. That same day, August 21st, 2-5 is brought over. There's still, the Navy's been ran off by this point, but there's still some Higgins boats here, as well as some PT boats, and they're able to ferry 2-5 back from Tulagi. So on August 24th, there's a significant naval battle that's fought here. It's the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, and that's where the Japanese carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku, which are both Pearl Harbor veterans, as well as the escort carrier Ryujo, square off against the USS Saratoga and the Enterprise. So we sink the light carrier Ryujo, but the Enterprise is heavily damaged. What's more significant is the loss of 61 Japanese pilots versus 7 U.S. pilots. And we'll see going forward, if you study the war, the loss of Japanese pilots and their inability to replace not only aircraft but experienced air crews is really what cripples their carrier fleet more than the loss of the carriers themselves. So this also created an issue where the Japanese shifted from running supplies to Guadalcanal. They were using transports. They begin to use destroyers. So that does a few things. It really creates a ton of maintenance issues on their destroyers. It uses a ton of fuel, which they lack. They can't. They don't have the logistical capability to disembark heavier equipment or artillery. The landings are take longer because they're unloading off destroyers. So strategically, this creates a lot of issues for the Japanese. So the battle after, or the day after the Battle of Eastern Solomons on August 25, some Marine flyers from Henderson Field damage a destroyer Jinsu and disable a transport and another destroyer Matsuki. And that began basically the Japanese realized the air power on Henderson Field. So their reply to this was to begin daily bombing raids by their twin-engine Betty bombers, escorted by Zeros from Rabaul to Henderson Field. And just a note, so Henderson Field, and a note about these air battles. Henderson Field is named for a Marine pilot who's killed at Midway. That's why it's called Henderson. There's a conglomerate air group here led by Major General Geiger. So mostly Marine Wildcats and Avenger bombers. They call themselves the Cactus Air Force because Cactus is the code name for the island of Guadalcanal. We'll see Army P-40s land here. They'll create another fighter strip off of Henderson Field. And the worst days are not yet to come. They're short on aviation gas. They wake up early in the mornings to fight all day as they get bombed. But there is one advantage they have. A, they're fighting on their home turf really because Japanese planes have to fly down from Rabaul. And B is we have a series of what's Australian coast watchers. So these were colonial holdovers, Australians who stayed in these islands after the Japanese occupied them with radios. So they were right outside Rabaul and they could radio back to Guadalcanal and say, hey, you have a flight, these many planes, this altitude heading to you. So this would give the flyers on Henderson Field a heads up of what was coming. So on September 8th, the Tasamboko raid occurs. So the 1st Raider Battalion and the 1st Parachute Battalion, basically there's a freshly landed Japanese force. We happen to land the Raiders and these Paramarines kind of right behind them, right on their heels, and they're able to destroy a ton of supplies and a ton of medical equipment, food. They don't really engage this Japanese force too heavily. They kill 27 Japanese troops before withdrawing, but a lot of the Japanese medicine, food, ammunition stockpiles are destroyed in the Tasamboko raid. So on September 12th, the Raiders and Paramarines are pulled back from the raid. They're withdrawn via Higgins boats. and it's thought they're put in a quiet sector. So 1st Marines are holding the Tenaroo River here on the east or the left flank. The 5th Marines are holding the Lunga River here on the west or the right flank. And there's this ridge line here just south of Henderson Field, really overlooking the field, really close to the airfield. And the Raiders and Paramarines are put here. It's thought to be a quiet sector. They're given mail as they're walking up to the ridge. But Colonel Edson doesn't share that feeling, and he thinks that this the Kawaguchi Brigade, which has just landed, is going to attack over Edson's Ridge. So I'm going to read a passage here. No Bended Knee, the Battle for Guadalcanal. This is written by General Twining at the time he was a colonel, and he was the operations officer. I'm sorry, I'm going to read Victory at Guadalcanal. Misread my notes. So Victory at Guadalcanal, not a super long, not a super short history, but a really good history of the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal. So let me get to the right page here. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm reading Bended Knee. Okay. Can't read my own notes. Can't keep track of my own notes. So getting to the right page here about Edson's Ridge. So just before Edson's Ridge, Admiral Kelly Turner visits the division, inspects the lines, and he goes, oh, by the way, I have this note from Admiral Gormley, who's like the commander of naval forces in the Southwest Pacific. So even before the Battle of Edson's Ridge, this is what's going on. It was written by hand on a social note paper. It briefly stated the situation confronting him as Commander of Southern Pacific, resulting from heavy losses at sea, and he went on to say he could provide no further support for Guadalcanal and that we were on our own. He specifically authorized the General Vandegrift, to make any necessary decisions or arrangements. In any case, the meaning was clear. In a minute or two, General Vandegrift entered, visibly perturbed. The tent was dimly lit, and I do not believe the general knew I was standing there. His night vision was already failing, and his condition aggravated, no doubt, by our terrible diet. He told Jerry, in effect, as long as I am here, there will be no surrender of this place. We will continue as we are. Tell Bill Twining to prepare a plan of withdrawal to Lunga using our amphibian tractors if it becomes necessary. This was the only occasion I ever heard General Vandegrift use the word surrender. The quite evident emotional state of both indicated to me they had only moments before read Gormley's note. So General Vandegrift, who's subordinate to Gormley, is handed this note by the Navy, basically saying, we can't support you. You're on your own, and make arrangements to surrender if necessary. So that's a pretty tough note to be handed by the commander of naval forces in the Southern Pacific. Okay, so now switching to victory at Guadalcanal. Let me get to the right page here. So they get shelled by a naval barrage out from the channel. So there's Japanese ships right off the coast, shelling, preparatory shelling, 8 inchers onto Edson's Ridge, lasting 20 minutes, and then the distant chanting of the Kawaguchis could be heard, punctuated now by strings of firecrackers, hundreds of them popping all across the front. The Japanese had completely discarded any attempts at stealth. They were relying on Bushido. On they came, screeching through the night, firing as they advanced. 2 strong thrusts were initially made along the east bank of the lagoon that constituted the dividing line between B and C companies. Communication to the battalion CP had gone out. The right platoon of B was driven from its position. A second banzai charge ripped the left flank of C Company and isolated its command. For 2 hours, the jungle raged with rifle and machine gun fire. The action on Edson's imperiled right turned into a free-for-all, with friend and foe inextricably entangled. Division came back on the line. What's your situation, Mike? I've lost contact with both Baker and Charlie. Nothing happened on my left. What do you plan to do? I'm going to have to commit my reserve. If I can't patch that hole, the Nips will have a straight shot at the airfield. A and D company stood ready, but at midnight all the firing sputtered to a stop. The Raider boss looked up at Colonel Griffith. What do you think, Sam? The exec cupped his ear. Sounds like axes and shovels, entrenching. Maybe they're calling it a night. Maybe. The phone at Edson's side rang again. It was the line from Charlie Company. Colonel? The voice spoke perfect English, accent free, but Edson did not recognize it. The reason was immediately clear. It had to be a Japanese officer. Everything down here, Colonel, is going fine. Good night, sir. Well, I'll be goddamned. Red Mike hung up. His defense had been bent like a horseshoe around the ridge. Only one narrow access road to the battlefield below was left. The Raiders had been stunned. At midnight exactly, for a full 45 minutes, the Japanese naval shelling resumed. This time the airfield, Vandegrift's headquarters, and Red Mike's as yet untouched left flank received the bombardment. Sam Griffith had guessed right. The Japanese had dug in for the night. So at this point, the Raiders are pushed back. B and C Company are isolated. Colonel Edson's right flank is basically ripped apart, and only his left flank, his A and D companies, still standing. On the morning of the 12th, the Raiders regroup and try and retake the positions. They can't, and they decide to pull back and consolidate their position. So I'm going to go back to Old Breed here, page 76, and read you an excerpt there. And I don't want to rely too much on these, but the first-hand accounts, and these accounts are super well written, and I'd be remiss if I tried to do it myself. It's much easier to read out of here. So so Edson brings in his commanders, and he talks about retaking these positions and retaking the ridge. It was a small audience he had, and recollections of Edson's exact words are fuzzy. He told us that this was it, one listener remembers. He said that there was nothing but us between the Japs and Henderson Field. He said if we didn't hold, the whole Guadalcanal landing would be a flop. Edson apparently communicated his intense sincerity. The men really turned to then. There was no more grumbling. It probably wouldn't be fair to say that they had a renewed spirit, but you can certainly say they went about the business of getting ready for the second night with utmost seriousness, if not with an air of remarkable resignation. So September 13th, 2-5 is pushed up on this ridge. And a second night of fighting occurs on Edson Ridge, and they're able to basically push back the Japanese attack of the Kawaguchis there. Let's go back to this real quick. The 1st Parachute Battalion, meanwhile, had not been in serious trouble during the first night, and its position had remained practically unchanged. Companies B and C were in position on the left flank of the ridge across the flat, jungle-covered lowland, while Company A was in reserve to the left rear of the center sector. All of the parachute companies were badly depleted, and one observer warns, remember that they were trained to drop and hit fast. They were a little sick of being used as infantrymen. That's always the trouble with elite troops. Even the Raiders were a little bit that way, but both thought of themselves as hit-and-run boys. As the day's light dimmed, the Raiders and parachutists could hear the yakety-yak of Japanese out ahead becoming more shrill, more urgent. And at 18:30, when night had just closed in, darkening and masking from the Marines' view, reassuring sight of nearby foxholes, someone of the Japanese cried out in English, "Gas attack." Whether the Japanese actually uttered the words or not, some smoke, probably from a flare, came rolling down the ridge. Then the Japs came on, some down the spur, some down the spine, some in the jungle by the banks of the Lunga, firing from the hip, hurling grenades, now grunting with the weight of their weapons, now jabbering in shrill Bushido inspiration. Company B of the Raiders was hit hardest, out on the right flank where the Japs had struck the night before. The Japanese quickly surrounded one of B platoons, and the rest of B fought on in some confusion back to the top of the ridge to join Company C, leaving a gap for the Kawaguchi to come through. This many of them did before the flank could be anchored again. The places where it is possible to put a finger on leadership and its value in crisis are rarer than most military histories would indicate. They often exaggerate the role of the commander. Many units have fought gloriously under bad commanders. The second night of the Battle of the Ridge, however, is an instance where leadership possibly made the difference between defeat and victory, where 3 officers, at least, and probably more, gave their men distinguished leadership under fire and held units together by example. So it talks about Edson, talks about Torgerson, and I'll skip forward here. Torgerson was a power marine. At 2,200, Edson sent word that his force stood only 300 strong against the still oncoming wave of Japs, a situation he seemed to be less alarmed about than did the staff of the division CP, where a few Japanese had begun to snipe. At 22:30, the Japanese threw a fresh force at the parachutists. At this time, the artillerymen and the 11th Marines had been standing in frustration by their guns because the lines were so intermingled it was hard to safely fire effectively. Now they were to have a chance. When the parachutists were hit, Edson was forced to pull the whole line back and reform it at what had been the battalion reserve. As they moved back, our 105s opened up with the heaviest concentration Guadalcanal had seen so far. The way it fell, it looked as if the artillery lads were trying to burn out their barrels. So fast and furiously did the shells go over the raiders. Out of this barrage grew a story. A Jap officer is supposed to have asked later, upon his capture, to see the automatic artillery we used that night. By 02:30, Edson sent word that his men could not hold. By sunrise, the attacks were growing weaker. By daylight, they stopped. No loss on a battlefield is light. If one man dies, the loss is heavy. You can say that about the Battle of the Ridge, however, that we suffered less than the Japs. Startlingly less. At about the same ratio we lost at the Tenaru. 31 killed, 104 wounded, and 9 missing. The Japs lost easily half their men. More than 600 dead ones lay there on the ridge to be counted, and many more were killed in mopping up. So that's Edson's Ridge. That same night, 3-1 repulsed an attack on the Tenaru. And on September 14th, on the right flank of the Lunga River, 3-5 faced a severe attack. And similar to Edson's Ridge, they were pushed off a large ridge they were on and basically had to retake in the morning. So this is the failed attack of the Kawaguchi Brigade. So they shatter themselves at Edson's Ridge and at 3-5 on the Lunga, as well as 3-5 on the Tenaru. They try and have a coordinated attack, and they're pushed back. And this creates like kind of this lull in the fighting. At this time, Colonel Whaling creates the scout sniper section, so committed to not recommitting the errors of the Goki patrol. He wants to create a scout sniper section, more scouts than snipers, but they would basically go on, get trained at division, push back down to the battalions, and would be at the lead of a lot of operations and a lot of patrols in the jungles. On September 18th, the 7th Marines out of Samoa arrive to reinforce the perimeter here. And although we're gaining another regiment, the situation at Guadalcanal is still very much in doubt. So, grab a sip of salt and coffee here. So on September 23rd, Vandegrift can tell the morale is pretty rough. Food's still short, supplies are still short. We really haven't seen our Navy. We've been reinforced by the 7th, but we've taken some licks. So we tried to go on the offensive. We want to push out to the Matanikau River and cross it. So with fresh troops, we send 1-7 across. And this is where we have a lot of issues with communication, a lot of issues with command and control. A lot of battalion commanders at this time were NCOs or junior officers in like Nicaragua, where you would send a lieutenant out with a platoon and he wouldn't report back to higher headquarters for months or for weeks. So that mindset kind of infiltrates this. and these battalions are sent out and they don't report back to division really for hours or days. So 1-7 cannot get across. We send the Raiders to look for another crossing, and they're repulsed. But division doesn't know that the Raiders couldn't make it across. So they decide to pull 1-7 back, take 2 companies from 1-7, and land them on the west shore of the Matanikau. So 2 companies set up on a hilltop west of the Matanikau. The Japanese see this. They see them land in these Higgins boats, and they basically encircle these Marines. So we have 2 companies from 1-7 that are basically we basically trap ourselves on the west side of a river that we cannot get across. So Chesty Puller is the battalion commander. He's out with these 2 companies. He gets back to the division. He gets back to friendly lines and says, "Hey, I need a destroyer, and there's some naval support. I need a destroyer and some Higgins boats to extract my 2 companies." So with heavy support from a destroyer, heavy artillery support, they're able to fight their way out. Some really great stories of personal valor. Marines fighting rear guard to let their brothers escape, and those 2 companies are withdrawn. But it just goes to show, this aggressive spirit can be a little too aggressive, and we still lack a lot of command and control at the division level that we need going further. So we lick our wounds. 2 weeks later, October 7th, we make a second crossing of the Matanikau. So 3-5 is the advanced guard. They make some contact in the jungles west of Lunga, like right off the bat at 1000, but they're able to push to the western or to the eastern bank of the Matanikau, and there they kind of corner a pocket of Japanese. Raiders are brought in to help secure that pocket. On the next morning, October 8th, this Japanese detachment tries to break out of this pocket, go right at the Raiders. There's a ton of hand-to-hand combat, and actually most of that Raider unit are killed. However, most of the Japanese are killed as well. But again, it goes to show the ferocity of the Japanese fighter on an individual level. So they suffer a lot from leadership. They don't want to use flanking maneuvers. They don't coordinate well. However, the Japanese fighter one-on-one is still a fantastic fighter, especially in hand-to-hand combat. So 1-7, while 3-5 and the 5th Marines hold the east side of the bank, 1-7 once again crosses the Matanikau. 2 weeks later, they go back to the same ridge where they were trapped 2 weeks prior, but kind of flip the script. And they trap about 700 Japanese between the river and this ridge. There's devastating mortar fire, and there's 640 Japanese troops killed in this pocket here. So it's an extremely successful action. So offshore at this time, about 3-4 days later, on October 11th, the naval battle of Cape Esperance is fought. And this is where Norman Scott, who's a cruiser leader, engages Japanese forces in the Eastern Solomons. So the Japanese lose a heavy cruiser, Furutaka, and a destroyer, Fubuki, and we lose 1 destroyer, the Duncan. So again, this is like a night action, kind of forces meeting. Norman Scott is able to maneuver somewhat and cross the T, but the Duncan that we lost was hit by both sides. And again, the U.S. Navy is still learning to fight at night. We killed a ton of sailors with friendly fire, but we were able to overcome that and sink a Japanese heavy cruiser. But of course, the losses are still heavily on our side versus the Japanese as far as the naval battle of Guadalcanal. So I'm going to go to Hornfisher. This is his book about naval battle of Guadalcanal. Neptune's Inferno. Hornfisher is like a fantastic author. He's a great naval historian, and his writing is fantastic. So I'm going to refer to him here when we talk about the landing of the Sendai Division, or the fallout, basically, of this Battle of Cape Esperance. Though the U.S. Navy had victory to celebrate, its immediate benefit to the men of Guadalcanal would be negligible. The reinforcement group that had sailed ahead of Goto benefited from Scott's preoccupation with the cruisers. Eluding detection, it reached Doma Cave on Guadalcanal's north coast, unloaded its cargo of artillery vehicles, men, and supplies, and escaped before the rise of the morning. As the events of the next 48 hours would show, the Marines of Generals Vandegrift's garrison and the airmen at Henderson Field had yet to experience their most trying hour. Scott's victory, though invigorating boost to the spirits, would do little to stop the coming rain of fire. So, again, the Marines at Guadalcanal, hey, we just won this great naval battle. Great. We engaged the escort fleet, but this reinforcement of the Sendai Division landed. So we now have even more fresh Japanese troops that are coming to recapture Henderson Field. So on October 13th at night, so the U.S. fleet of cruisers, of course, engages the Japanese escort fleet, but of course, a lot of our ships are damaged and are forced to withdraw as well. And they're simply outgunned. So on October 13th, the Japanese send 2 battleships, the Congo and the Haruna, down to shell Henderson Field. So again, I'm going to go back to Hornfisher here. On the afternoon of October 14th, Gormley informed Nimitz that Japanese transports would land on the island that night, that enemy carriers and cruisers were on the move, and that he had no carriers to intercept. Quote, the situation is critical, and the enemy reinforcements must be stopped if our position in Cactus is to be held. That night, the defenders of Henderson Field were given no peace for rest. Admiral Mikawa and his flagship Shokai, with the heavy cruiser Kinugasa, accompanied a convoy to its unloading point off Tassafaranga, then detached 2 cruisers to roam off Henderson Field. As the transports anchored offshore and began disgorging troops to the beach, the 2 cruisers lit up the sound for the second consecutive night, firing more than 700 8-inch shells into the airfield without challenge. At dawn, the unloading of Japanese transports continued within plain sight of the besieged Marine detachment, but outside the range of their artillery. Going to continue on, skip ahead. The success of the enemy landings underscored an undeniable truth. In the words of the Coast Watcher Mackenzie, it became immediately obvious that to hold Guadalcanal, it was essential for the U.S. Navy to gain control of the sea. Looking to his roster of ships after Cape Esperance, Nimitz wrote to King. So Nimitz is commander of the Navy in the Pacific, and King is the chief of naval operations overall. Security of our position in Cactus depends upon additional forces not now in sight. Vandegrift's Marines, he noted, had taken a heavy pounding from air and sea and, quote, cannot remain effective indefinitely under such conditions, end quote. Nimitz wrote, quote, it now appears that we are unable to control the sea in the Guadalcanal area. Thus, our supply of the positions will be done only at great expense to us. The situation is not hopeless, but it is certainly critical. Marine Intelligence Officer Herbert Merrillet wrote in his diary on October 15th, where is our Navy? Everyone wants to know. I still have some confidence in them and feel sure they are doing something to counter this threat. If not, we are lost. Surveying the grassy expanse of the Fighter 1 airstrip half a mile from Henderson Field, General Geiger said to one of his squadron commanders, I don't think we have a goddamn Navy. So we've won some victories, turned back some attacks on the ground, taken our own offensives, but the situation is still extremely critical, obviously. So on October 16th, go back to Hornfisher here. So the 13th and 14th, the positions Henderson Field shelled by battleships and heavy cruisers. We see a ton of fresh Japanese troops landed outside of the reach of our artillery. Our airfield is extremely damaged. We're super limited on aircraft, so we can't really counter it. it's a pretty dark day. So Nimitz looks at Gormley, looks at what he's been doing. Gormley is the admiral in charge of the Southwest Pacific, and his staff, especially Leighton. So if you watch like the Midway movie, Leighton is the intel officer who says the Japanese are going to attack Midway. He's still on Nimitz's staff, and he leads almost this mutiny of staff officers who convinced Nimitz to relieve Gormley. So I'll read. A few days after Nimitz decried their mutiny, Leighton and some other staff officers decided they need to see their commander-in-chief again to press their earlier recommendation. We wasted no time spelling out what was on our minds, Leighton wrote. The situation was so grave that we cannot allow any thought of kindness or sympathy for a brother officer to stand in the way. Nimitz thanked us. So Nimitz labors, he's really good friends with Gormley. And the next day, October 16th, he sends this dispatch to Admiral King, the chief of naval operations. Goes, in view of Gormley's latest dispatch and other indications, including some noted during my visit, I have under consideration his relief by Halsey at earliest practicable time. Request your comment. So King basically sends back approved. So kind of a turning point. Halsey is hyper aggressive, as we'll see later in the war, sometimes to a fault. But in this juncture, had Gormley continued as a commander, it's unsure whether he would have been aggressive enough to relieve the 1st Marine Division at Guadalcanal. So that's a pretty significant strategic decision made by Nimitz, affecting the Marines on the island. So that's October 16th. October 21st, when the Sendai Division lands, they have this plan for a coordinated attack. So they're going to attack basically a 3-prong attack across the perimeter, but there are forces that have to move inland to attack Edson's Ridge take much longer than they thought. And that coincides with Colonel Oka, who's in charge of attacking off along the Matanikau River, is extremely cautious and really fails to commit his entire force. So these two things contribute to the coming Japanese loss in late October. So October 23rd, 5th Marines repulses an attack along the Matanikau. October 24th, this is when the famous action by 1-7 on Edson's Ridge, they repulsed an attack, and to the point where a battalion from the 164th is sent in to reinforce. So the October 24th attack was supposed to coincide with the attack along the Matanikau. Of course, the force that attacks 1-7 takes too long to transit. They can't get to the jump off point on time. So that's why these are 2 uncoordinated attacks on different days. So I'm going to go to the old breed, page 106. And I would be remiss if I did not talk about John Basilone at 1-7. So this is a direct interview with him from Marine Combat Correspondent. When the first wave came at us, the ground just rattled. We kept firing and drove them back, but our ammunition was getting low. So I left the guns and started running to the next outfit to get some more. Soon after I got back, a runner came in and told me that the emplacements on the right, Japs had broken through. With their knives, they had killed 2 of the crew and wounded 3, and the guns were jammed. I took off up the trail to see what happened. I found Evans there. He had his rifle by him and was screaming at the Japs to come on. What a guy he is. He's only 18 years old and runs around barefoot all the time. After that, I came back to my own guns, grabbed one of them, and told the crew to follow me. Up the trail we went. I was carrying the machine gun by the tripod. We left 6 dead Japs on the trail. While I fixed the jams on the other 2 guns up there, we started to set up. We were really pinned down. Bullets were smacking into the sandbags. The Japs were still coming at us, and I rolled over from one gun to the other, firing them as fast as they could be loaded. The ammunition belts were in awful shape as they'd been dragged on the ground. I had to scrape mud out of the receiver. They kept coming, and we kept firing. We all thought our end had come. Some Japs would sneak through the lines and behind us. It got pretty bad because I'd have to stop firing every once in a while and shoot behind me with my pistol. At dawn, our guns were just about burnt out. Altogether, we got rid of 26,000 rounds. After that, I discovered I was hungry, so I went to the CP to see about getting chow. All we could get was crackers and jam. So that's from Basilone himself that he got interviewed. And that's the night of August 24th. On August 25th, another attack basically happens in the same spot on Edson's Ridge against 1-7. By some accounts, it was harsher than the first night where Basilone earned his Medal of Honor. There's also severe fighting by 2-7 on the northwest corner of the position along the river and the coastline, and that's where Mitchell Page receives his Medal of Honor. So skipping to Mitchell Page's Medal of Honor. So he talks about throwing a ton of grenades. They don't want to give away where the position where the machine guns are. And then finally, then I gave the word to fire. Machine guns and rifles let go, and the whole line seemed to light up. Petty John yelled down to me that his gun was out of action. In the light from the firing, I could see several Japs a few feet away from Leipart. Apparently, he had been hit because he was down on one knee. I knocked off 2 Japs with a rifle, but a third drove his bayonet into Leipart. Leipart was dead. Seconds later, so was a Jap. After a few minutes, I wouldn't swear to how long it was, the blitz became a hand-to-hand battle. Gaston was having trouble with a Jap officer. I remember that much. Although his leg was nearly hacked off and his rifle all cut up, Gaston finally connected with his boot to the Jap's chin. The result was one slope head with a broken neck. Firing died down a little, so evidently the first wave was a flop. I crawled over to Petty John, and while he and Faust covered me, I worked to remove a ruptured cartridge and change the belt feed pawl. Just as I was getting ready to feed in a belt of ammo, I felt something hot on my hand and a sharp vibration. Some damn slopehead with a light machine gun had fired a full burst into the feeding mechanism and wrecked the gun. Things got pretty bad on the second wave. The Japs penetrated our left flank, carried away all the opposition, and we were possibly in a position to attack our Ridge-Nose from the rear. On the left, however, Grant, Payne, and Hinton stood by. In the center, Locke, Swaynack, and McNabb got it and were carried to the rear by Corman. The Navy boys did a wonderful job and patched up all the casualties, but they were still bleeding like hell and couldn't tell what was wrong with them, so I sent them back. That meant that all my men were casualties and I was on my own. It was lonely up there with nothing but dead slopeheads for company, but I couldn't tell you what I was thinking. I guess I was really worrying about the guns, shooting as fast as I could and getting a bead on the next and nearest Jap. One of the guns I couldn't find because it wasn't firing. I figured the boys had been hit and had put the gun out of action before leaving. I was always very insistent that if for any reason they had to leave a gun, they would put it out of action so the Japs wouldn't be able to use it. Without a gun myself, I dodged over to the unit on the right to get another gun and give them the word that what was going on. Kelly and Topman helped me bring the gun back towards the nose of the ridge, and we zigzagged under an enemy fire that never seemed to stop. While I was on the right flank, I borrowed some of the riflemen to form a skirmish line. I told them to fix bayonets and follow me. Kelly and Topman fed me ammo as I sprayed every inch of terrain free of Japs. Dawn was beginning to break, and in the half-light, I saw my own machine gun still near the center of the nose. It was still in working order, and some Japs were crawling towards it. We got there just in time. I left Kelly and Topman and ran over to it. For too many moments, it seemed as the whole Japanese army was firing at me. Nevertheless, 3 men on the right flank thought I might be low on ammunition and volunteered to run it up to me. Stapp brought one belt, and he went down with a bullet in the stomach. Riley came with another belt. Just as he reached the gun, he was hit in the groin. His feet flew out and nearly knocked me off the gun. Then John Jack arrived with a belt and stopped a bullet in the shoulder. As I turned, I saw a piece of flesh disappear from his neck. I told him to go back and get medical aid, but he refused. He wanted to stay up there with me. There was no time to argue, so I tapped him on the chin hard enough that he went down. That convinced him that I wanted my order obeyed. So that's Mitchell Page. So that was the night of October 25th. So that was supposed to be a combined attack really across those 3 days. But because of lack of Japanese coordination, it was spread along 3 days. And who knows, if that had been a coordinated attack, who knows if the perimeter would have been able to hold, because artillery would have been forced to fire in different directions and multiple reasons. So the next day, on October 26th, we see the battle for Santa Cruz. We lose the carrier Hornet. We damage the Japanese carrier Shokaku. And like I said, the Zuikaku, the carrier itself was lightly damaged, but their air group was essentially destroyed. And a strategic thing that we did versus the Japanese, U.S. air groups were able to, squadrons plugged and played into different carriers, or we could take a carrier from the Enterprise and land them on Cactus and have them be a part of the airfield and replace them. Japanese air groups, the air groups belong to the ship. So if we totally wiped out the air group of the Zuikaku, that carrier had to go back to Tokyo and totally train up a new whole air group, and they couldn't replace it with an experienced air group or mix and match or land one from a damaged carrier. Couldn't send its planes to an undamaged carrier. Just organizationally, the Japanese were not designed for that, and they did not change their ways. So back to Horn Fisher real quick. Again, he's just a fantastic author when it comes to Navy stuff. After the Battle of Santa Cruz, the United States would not have a single operable carrier in the task force in the South Pacific until the Enterprise could be repaired at Noumea and placed back into service. Task Group 17 was dissolved with the sinking of the Hornet, and with the Enterprise going to the yard for repairs, the battleship South Dakota was sent to join the battleship Washington and Task Force 64. Having exhausted their carriers in the seas east of Guadalcanal on October 26, the opposing fleets returned to their bases to regroup. With Halsey's and Yamamoto's carriers sidelined for now, the question to be answered in the parry and thrust of the coming weeks was, which side's surface combat fleet would step up and control the seas by night? No matter how gallantly men might fight on land, they would not hold on long if their navy finally failed them. In a few short weeks, the greatest challenge yet to save the American position on Guadalcanal would loom in the dark waters of Savo Sound. So again, huge Japanese attack, amazing repulsiveness, and we are still, facing the fire. So repulsed attack after attack, and the Japanese just keep reinforcing. So again, November 1st, so that's October 26th. November 1st, again, General Vandegrift sees we just repulsed this huge attack. Morale is a little low. What can we do? So he decides to go on an offensive. It's the second Matanikau offensive. So by this time, the 2nd Marine Regiment had landed. So we have 1-2, 2-2, the entire 5th Marines, and 3-7. They're going to go attack out towards the grassy knoll, out towards the Matanikau, and there's some Japanese artillery emplacements in the high ground here. So there's just a side note. There's this lieutenant from the 1st Marines, Ramrod Taylor. He's an intelligence officer, and he goes, hey, we're doing this huge operation to take out these guns. I bet I could take a small element and destroy them myself. So not to go too into the weeds of the small action, but they go out there. They're able to dismantle the breeches of a few of these cannons while the Japanese sleep. They're exposed by a barking dog. They go back the next day because of their success. They're ambushed by over a company of Japanese, his small team. And Ramrod Johnson basically stands up, tells his Marines to get out, and covers their withdrawal, and sacrifices his own life in the process. So the 5th Marines attacks, and they're able to envelop and destroy an entire Japanese unit. So it's pretty successful action, but they're forced to withdraw. On the eastern side, a patrol by 2-7, led by Lieutenant Colonel Hannikin. So if you watch Pacific, you hear Chesty talk about Colonel Hannikin. They spot a landing on the east side of the perimeter. So they're patrolling, and they see Japanese troops disembarking on the east side of the perimeter. They withdraw to a river, but they're quickly surrounded, and this relief force is sent out to relieve 2-7, which is surrounded. So they don't make their way out there until November 10th, but it's a huge relief force. consists of 1-7. By this time, there was an Army regiment, the 164th. There's 2 battalions from them. 210 has landed, and they're sent to make contact, which they do on 10 November. So they're isolated for almost a week out on the east side of the perimeter. 2-7 is, and this relief force goes and relieves them. So Carlson's Raiders are landed further east, like way out there, and I'll describe them. This is different than Edson's Raiders force. So Carlson's Raiders made the Macon landing. They reinforce Guadalcanal, and they do what's called this long patrol. So while the fight was going on around the Metapona River, so that's the relief of 2-7 out east of the Tenaroo River. While the fight was going on around the Metapona River, another force of Americans was making a landing still farther eastward at Aola, 35 miles from Lunga Point. So we're pretty far east from the perimeter here. This assault force was the 2nd Raider Battalion, which had landed mid-August in Macon and destroyed the Japanese garrison. They started back westward from our perimeter to catch that force of Japs which had broken out of our trap of Metapona. Following inland trails, the Raider advance patrols ran into the Japs on the upper Metapona on November 11th and began that day a series of guerrilla actions which lasted until November 18th, when the Japs began to move farther inland and out westward towards our perimeter. The Raiders turned in pursuit and fought what has become the classic private wars of World War II. In exactly 30 days, the Raiders had executed a long and arduous transit of mountains and forbidden country. They had fought no less than 12 successful actions and counted enemy dead in excess of 400. Their losses of 17 dead were surprisingly small. This was a remarkable performance even for fresh, well-trained troops, and the methods are worthy of study. So that's Evans Carlson's long patrol. So because of this large force found on the east, the Matanikau offensive is canceled and they're pulled back. So that brings us to mid-November. So on November 12th, the naval battle of Guadalcanal occurs. So the Japanese send the 2 battleships, the Hiei and the Kirishima, with a light cruiser and 11 destroyers, and their intent is to bombard Henderson Field. Admiral Scott is not necessarily relieved, but a superior commander, which is Admiral Callahan, counters with 2 cruisers, 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers. In this action, the U.S. lost the light cruiser Juno and Helena and 4 destroyers, and the Japanese lose a battleship, the Hiei, and 2 destroyers. So, again, like, we sink a Japanese battleship, but this is, again, another blundering night action by the U.S. Navy. We have ships with radar. Callahan ignores that. We could have easily engaged from way farther out. We had an advantage with radar that the Japanese didn't have. We basically go head on into a Japanese column and fight it. Basically a knife fight in the dark in a telephone booth. And we come out. We lose 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers. The Japanese only lose 2 destroyers, but a battleship. And I'll describe just some excerpts here of the battle. So, the radio logs documenting the approach showed Callahan torn between his competing senses, querying his destroyers ahead about what they were actually seeing, while the Helena dutifully weighed in, reporting contacts from her radar, which Callahan seemed to ignore. Nearly every question he asked the Cushing, leading the vanguard 2 miles ahead of him, could have been answered almost instantly by the Helena, following half a mile behind. Callahan placed his faith in people, not techniques, a preference which was expressed by his selection of the ship that led his column. So just talking about, we had radar and we ignored it and we didn't use it. Callahan's single column resembled a World War I vintage battle line of yore, but it echoed a weapon more ancient still as it thrust into the body of Hirokai Abe's force, a piercing longsword, or perhaps a lance. The American commander might have employed it as an archer, firing arrows, standing off, using his advanced sensors, killing by surprise out of the dark. Instead, he ran straight ahead, blade fixed, and plunged straight in. The delicate tip of his sword broke on first contact, the van destroyers penetrating momentarily before fracturing and throwing reverberations back towards Callahan, riding in the hilt. What followed was a melee, Coliseum style, with the lights out and a heavy fog blown over the fighting arena. What can be settled and known as the time of first contact and the time ultimately of disengagement. The terrible middle became a swirl of slash and thrust, ship against ship, captain against the enemy of the moment, which, battered then vanishing, was replaced by a new enemy who delivered or received the next blow unwittingly. So, again, we have ships with radar. We decide to rush in, and the Japanese are experts at night fighting. They're experts with searchlight tactics, so they would light up a ship out of the dark with their destroyers and allow their bigger ships to target it. And these were things that the American Navy was not good at. So we had an advantage, and we decided to play to the enemy's advantage. For years, no one would speak comfortably of what had happened that night or how. Lloyd Mustin was among the first to suspect it. He saw it as it was happening in a blinding incandescent flash of nitrocellulose powder. This illuminated the firing ship brilliantly and unmistakably, Mustin said. It was as easy to recognize a San Francisco in the flash of her own guns as it would have been at high noon on San Francisco Harbor. Norman Scott was a fantastic admiral, and his staff and so many men had been cut down by Callahan's flagship, which was, it seems, firing on an enemy target beyond the Atlanta. Scott had learned in the Battle of Cape Esperance what happens when ships get caught between friends and enemies at night and lose track of each other with no ready means of identification. Visibility was poor owing to the heavy smoke. Flames and flashes of muzzles constricted the pupils. According to San Francisco signalman Vic Gibson, watching from the signal bridge, the Atlanta was caught in a crossfire. We were firing at such close range that the shells leaving our guns were going right through the superstructure of the Atlanta, and the Jap shells were doing the same from their direction. So just a tragic miscue in that battle. So on November 13th, so the next day, the Henderson Airfield Air Group, as well as some PT boats that were now stationed at Henderson Field, were able to attack some Japanese transports coming from Rabaul. And this is a pretty big victory. They sink a heavy Japanese cruiser as well as 6 transports. 4 transports beached themselves at Tassafaronga, but they were within, so right here, but they're within range of our artillery. So they're heavily strafed and subject to our artillery. And basically what this signals for the Japanese is really they were not an effective fighting force. It was just more troops, more mouths to feed. We destroyed a ton of their medicine, a ton of their food, and this was described as just adding to the Japanese misery on Guadalcanal. 2 days after that, the U.S. Navy is reinforced by 2 battleships, the Washington and South Dakota. So Admiral Ching Lee shows up, and they engage the 2nd Japanese battleship. So we had sunk the Kirishima, or we sunk the Hiei, and now we're going to engage the Kirishima. So this is just a blow counter blow as we see the Japanese trying to reinforce Guadalcanal. We try to intercept, and vice versa, and that's what a lot of these engagements become. Willis Lee and the Washington battleship had been patiently tracking a large target on his starboard hand, but since he had lost track of the South Dakota owing to his blind spot astern, he dared not loose his big guns on this bogey, the Kirishima, until our identity could be verified. So I'm going to skip ahead. While sailors in the open air station saw the horror of naval combat in the machine age with their own senses, Steaming through the debris field of the sunken destroyers, shouting out to sailors bobbing on rafts, nursing ghastly wounds, smelling the sweet tang of burned flesh inside, officers with access to radar image watched an abstract painting of the battlescape unfurl in remorseless electric light. It was a picture cleansed of horror and emotion. Lee knew how to operate by it. He trained one group of his starboard 5-inch dual mounts on the Otago, and his main battery another group of 5-inch mounts on the larger blip, the Kurashima. The Washington's unblinking electronic eyes nudged the main battery on target. From 8,400 yards, body punching range, as a Washington lieutenant put it, the South Pacific battleship gunslinger emerged from the cover of his burning destroyers and turned loose with everything he had. Naval engineers who designed protective armor for schemes for battleships calculated the need to stop large caliber direct gunfire from about 20,000 yards. But at close range, stopping a 16-inch projectile was hopeless. One of the South Dakota's turret officers, Paul Backus, explained, throwing 14-inch and 16-inch shells at that kind of range, Jesus. Willis Lee had won the draw on the Kirishima. So in that action, we lose some destroyers, as you heard there, but we sunk the Kirishima. So by this point, the Japanese, we've essentially swung the balance of the Japanese to reinforce Guadalcanal. We've destroyed 2 of their battleships, a large portion of their surface fleet at Rabaul, destroyed a ton of their transport fleet, and as well as 2 full divisions that had been thrown at the line and repulsed, and 2 detachments, the Kawaguchi and the Achiki detachment. By this time, however, in early December, the 1st Marine Division was about combat ineffective. Not necessarily from losses due to combat, but losses due to the jungle. A lot of Marines had malaria. They were fighting in obviously jungle conditions. Jungle rot was terrible. They had no socks. Clothes were rotting off their bodies. They were lived off a ration of 1 cup of rice for weeks at a time, and they were just generally tired. By December 1st, the division had over 3,000 cases of malaria, and by this time, the island was being reinforced as well. So the Army's Americal Division was landed. Basically, the full 2nd Marine Division had landed. They were tasked with clearing the rest of Guadalcanal. So in total, the 1st Marine Division had 621 Marines killed in action and 1,517 wounded in action. The Japanese in total landed 40,000 troops on the island of Guadalcanal. When they decided to evacuate the island, they were left with 10,000. So whether combat, disease, starvation, or otherwise, 30,000 Japanese troops died on Guadalcanal. On Guadalcanal, there'd be 5 Medals of Honor, 113 Navy Crosses, and 4 Distinguished Service Medals. Overall, Guadalcanal, a lot of people would point to it as the turning point in the Pacific War. Of course, it was the impetus for a lot of naval battles, not necessarily Midway, but the follow-on battles that don't get as much action, but were extremely significant in the strategic picture. And there really wouldn't be another naval battle or carrier battle fought, I believe, until mid-1944 when Japan contested the landings at Saipan. This was not only a turning point for the Japanese, where they realized there was a famous quote from a Japanese planner where he goes, at Guadalcanal, I realized the war could not be won. He said, I didn't know that it would necessarily be lost, but I knew it could not be won. It also marked basically the safety for Australia, that we were able to secure our southern flank in the Pacific, you could say. And it was a huge boon, of course, for the 1st Marine Division, which would go on to build a pretty impressive legacy. Just quick talking about the patch. I've talked about this before, but when they got to New Zealand or Australia, they designed this patch. The Southern Cross, which is a constellation which was clearly visible from Guadalcanal, is the basis, as well as the word Guadalcanal written on the patch. So it's a huge point of pride. The division would receive a presidential unit citation, and it's tough to underscore. I don't think people give enough credit to really how dire the situation on Guadalcanal was. Same with Chosin, but we'll discuss that another time. But there were moments where individual actions at the naval battle and on land could really turn the tide of the war and lost the entire division at Guadalcanal. Now, of course, for us in Marine Corps history, the loss of a division is unthinkable, but you think the British surrendered 80,000 troops in one day at Hong Kong. It wouldn't be anything for us to surrender 15, 20,000 on some unnamed island in the South Pacific. So I don't think we truly appreciate how dire the circumstances were on Guadalcanal. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to go forward in this series. I would really appreciate your feedback on what you liked, what you didn't like, if you want more or less of something. I'm not a graphics guy. I'm not a tech guy. So I probably could have done a little better on my hand-drawn map here. But like if you're looking for high special effects stuff, that's probably not going to happen. But I hope this helps you understand Guadalcanal. I know we talk about Guadalcanal a lot. A lot of people know the name, but I think probably don't have the context. And I hope you'll walk away with an understanding of the battle. And some further reading I just want to discuss. So the Old Breed, George McMillan. This was written in 1946, right after. That's a great book, great resource. No Bended Knee was written by General Twining. He was the operations officer for the 1st Marine Division, so you really want like behind the scenes look. Read a bunch. Hornfisher, Neptune's Inferno. He has a bunch of fantastic naval histories out there. Strong Men Armed. Robert Leckie, of course, he was there firsthand. But this is not Helmet for My Pillow. This is him as a historian writing about Marines of the Pacific. Great book. Victory at Guadalcanal, I read. It's a really quick, easy read, but it's just the right level of detail, right level of going in depth. First-hand account, Guadalcanal Diary by Richard Tregaskis. So he wasn't even there the whole time, but he was a writer and wrote about the early days on the island. That's a classic. On the Canal, so for my 3.5 dudes specifically, it's about Love Company 3.5 specifically on Guadalcanal. Now, if you want to take it in the next step from Victory in Guadalcanal, you get the Richard B. Frank Guadalcanal book. I saved you guys. I didn't read from this. It's fantastically written. It's a great book, but this goes in a fantastic level of detail. If you're a true historian, that's the book for you. And then lastly, really interesting, is Fighting on Guadalcanal. This was like a pamphlet, like a mini after action they compiled. They went around and interviewed all these officers and staff NCOs and NCOs. And they're like, hey, what did we learn here to carry forward? And there's great quotes from Chesty Puller in here about like, if you set up a command post, you've lost the initiative, like do not command from command posts. The Army does that. The Marine Corps should banish the word command post. Some awesome things in that little pamphlet as well. Like you probably hunt for it on eBay, or if you're curious, maybe I can try and scan it. But hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was educational. And I hope you learned something. Please give me feedback. I'm just a dude putting together stuff and reading off notes. Like if you didn't enjoy it or I was too choppy, maybe next time I'll try and do a script or do better visual aids. Let me know. Please let me know. I appreciate all your feedback. It's the first time I'm trying to do this. And I really value you guys who watch, who listen, and provide feedback. So please do that. Thanks, guys.